Yeah, well, welcome back. For those of you who have forgotten, I'm Stan. It's not me last week. That was Enrique. You know, I know we get mixed up a lot. Two stunningly handsome guys. But it's good to be back on this day, April 14th. Not a great day in history. A lot of weird things happened on this day, April 14th. Not the least of which is it was on this date in 1828 that the first American dictionary was published. First American dictionary, and it was by Noah Webster, right? Noah Webster, who was a believer. And but his first American dictionary came out today. 1828, about 15 years later, the first detective story was published. First short detective story. Does anybody know who wrote the first detective story in America? Edgar Allan Poe, The Murders in the Rue Morgue, which is, the street. The Rue is French for street. And he wrote another one, The Purloined Letter. Is that? No, The Purloined Letter. I think that's a Poe story. But yeah, he's credited as having written the first detective story, with the first modern kind of detective who's there in 1841. And the first detective novel, which is not today, is, I believe the author's name is Wilkie Collins, and the book is called The Moonstone, something like that. It's one of those things that when you start talking about people and they're, diehard history or mystery fans. I just know that because I was at school. I was talking to the librarian at the school, and I asked her what is the she's the librarian, right? So I said, well, what is the hot new book I need to read? And so she hands me this book called Truly Devious, the name of the book. And what she didn't tell me, and again, these days everything is a series, right? And what she didn't tell me was that you read the first book, and in the first book you have two murders dealing with one in the past, one in the present, or two deaths, I should say, one in the past, one in the present, and you have to read all three books to figure out who did the murder, which was like, I was really annoyed because now that's the sunk cost fallacy. The idea you've put enough time into this and you don't want to just give up the time. So it's like, great, I have to read another. Not only do I have to read another young adult novel, I have to read two more young adult novels.
You have to pay for it. You just borrow it.
I did. I didn't pay for it. Pardon me? Yeah.
So that was the devious part of it.
Yes, she is. She is, and then so I told her, we've been going back and forth about this, and she says, because you have to walk by the librarian to get to the office when you go into Bolingbroke, and she's like, have you started number 4 yet? I'm like, no, I'm not falling for that again. There's no way. But in that, the main character is a huge mystery fan, and so they were talking about the history of mystery books. I know you're wondering, what's that got to do with Edgar Allan Poe? But speaking of crimes of the century, it was on this date in 1865 that Abraham Lincoln was shot. He dies the next day. He doesn't die immediately, but he was shot on this date. And I believe, in fact, I don't believe, I know, there's a new series on some streaming service that follows the manhunt after he was shot. He was shot and killed by John Wilkes Booth, who was a fairly well-known actor at the time. And Booth jumps down on the stage and runs, and there's like a 12-day hunt for him and his accomplices, which ended up in a barn kind of thing. You wonder, John Wilkes Booth, they talk about he was a famous actor. His brother was the more famous actor. Okay, so his brother was Edwin Booth, who I've got this weird fascination with. I have his signature, Edwin Booth's signature on my wall, and a couple pictures of Edwin Booth and a couple of playbills of Edwin Booth. Very, very famous American actor. So his brother was the more famous actor. So he is like Stephen Baldwin. Okay, you go, well, who's Stephen Baldwin? Well, he's an actor. He's Adam Baldwin's brother. Oh, okay, I gotcha. He's like the Stephen Baldwin of the Booth family, sort of thing. But that's how he walked in. It was a theater, but he was well known enough that why didn't anybody stop him? Because he was an actor in a theater. That's where he was supposed to be. He didn't stick out. He was right in his element. But be that as it may. So yeah, I think it's on one of the streaming services called Manhunt. Talking about that. But the other useless piece of information, and this has nothing to do with the thing, he broke his leg falling, and then he goes to a doctor whose name is Mud. And the doctor fixes the leg, not realizing all. But so the doctor gets in trouble and for being a part of this. And some have suggested or opined that the expression, your name is Mud, comes from this doctor whose name was besmirched, even though the name is Mud, but was besmirched by having treated John Wilkes Booth.
So that's not necessarily true that that's where that phrase came from?
Yeah, it doesn't, I'm just,
Because I've heard that, but
Yeah.
that's where that name
Yeah,
that
yeah.
comes from. But
Also, do you remember the newsman, Roger Mudd? Yeah, they're related. Yeah, the Dr. Mudd who treated John Wilkes Booth. And all that. But in 1896, on this day, only two more things, then I'm going to finally get to the point. In 1896, it was on this date that John Harvey Kellogg of Battle Creek, Michigan, received a patent for flaked cereal and the process of making it, also known as cornflakes, making cornflakes in Battle Creek, Michigan. And I haven't been to Battle Creek, Michigan in a while, but I know you used to go there, and there used to be a big Kellogg's plant right there, and that's where they made cereal. Cornflakes, Frosted Flakes. Is that Kellogg's? It's been a while. I just do Cheerios now. This is getting old. There's nothing but Cheerios. And if I don't have my Cheerios in the morning, I'm cranky all day. Yes, that's But that's Debbie's first. Yeah, that's Debbie's first tip on keeping your husband in control. Feed him his cereal and snacks in the morning, and he's happy all day, something like that. And finally, it was on this date in 1912. Does anybody know what happened on this date in 1912? The Titanic hits an iceberg.
That's why Mike was so fascinated with today.
On this day that the Titanic hits an iceberg. And every year on this date, the Coast Guard flies an airplane over the spot and drops a wreath on the spot in the general vicinity of it. But yeah, it was on this date at 11:40 p.m. Took a while, took several hours for the ship to sink, but it was hit an iceberg. The interesting thing, think they didn't have enough life boats, but they had the legal amount of. So there was nothing like they weren't following the law or something. They had the legal amount of lifeboats on the Titanic. It was just nobody thought, if the ship is going to sink, you need a lifeboat for everyone. I don't know who. I mean, that's advanced thinking. That so apparently they figured, if the ship sinks, you're only going to save a certain percentage anyway. So that's what they were thinking back in that time. So, but yeah, so it was on this date. For a period of time, I've since let it lapse, but for a period of time I was a member of the Titanic Historical Society. And in fact, speaking of, on the same wall as my Edwin Booth. Did you catch the tone of voice? Did you catch that?
do you get a wall of stuff, or is it all taken?
She has a house of stuff.
He just has a little.
I have half a wall. She's got a whole house and a yard, kind of thing,
Be happy with that.
Yeah.
Your little 9x13.
Yeah. It's wall, closet, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, I have a picture, a framed picture of the Titanic. Just when I was a member of the Titanic Historical Society, I bought this nice picture of the Titanic and had it framed. I don't know, something about having this great picture of a disaster on my wall. Something, I don't know.
I would say like in about 40 years it won't exist because the wreck is crumbling and so it's the end of the Titanic sightseeing excursions. So
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that last one kind of put a damper on them. That last one that, where everybody died.
that'll
Kind of, well, I mean, it is one of those things where, only the people who are like really well off to begin with do it. So it's like, space exploration, or, riding one of those X rockets, climbing Mount Everest, going to see the Titanic. They're not even on my bucket list. I just have a picture on my wall kind of thing. So they're not big, thing. But, all right, well, we are in 2 Corinthians. 2 Corinthians, Paul's second canonical letter to the church at Corinth. Okay, so kind of going back, reviewing, because it's been 3 weeks. Paul spent some time in Corinth, year and a half. We know about that in Acts chapter 18. There is some correspondence between the church, and we know that Paul, or we have reason to believe that Paul wrote at least 4 letters to the church at Corinth. We believe that he wrote at least 4 letters, and he visited the church at least 3 times. And so this is what is often referred to as the second canonical letter. And there are some who believe that this is actually a combination of several different letters. And we'll actually talk about that a little bit today when we get to 6:14. But the first letter is dealing with issues in the church, and then there's somebody who is still causing problems with the church. Something is still not right. And so Paul is writing this letter, 2 Corinthians. And I was trying to think, another way to kind of describe Paul's feeling, or what Paul is trying to do. Paul looks at the church at Corinth as his child, something that he raised, okay? And it's kind of like the parent of an adult child trying to convince the adult child to straighten up and fly right, okay? Or fly differently, sort of thing, okay? Because, and if those of us who have adult children, we know that once the child leaves the roost, you have this idea that he or she is going to just you've got it figured out. You trained him or her that they're going to go right down the line. And those of you who have adult children, okay, now you don't have adults, so don't listen to this because it'll depress you. Okay, they're going to go right down the line. What happens the minute they're out the door?
They go south. Way south.
And you're thinking to yourself, didn't I raise you better? Didn't we teach you not to do that? But they're out of the house. You can't take their snacks away. You can't cut off their TV access. You can't discipline them in any way. There is nothing you can do. And threatening to cut them out of the will just doesn't have the pizzazz that you thought it would. Especially when you spent their whole growing up years explaining to them that your goal in life is to die broke. It doesn't work. That's yeah.
Especially when they tell you, but you're already broke, so what difference does it make?
Right.
Yeah, thanks to them.
I'm going to inherit debt from you. I don't So yeah. So and so you try to reel them back in. You try to say, yeah, but you can't just say because I said so. Not that ever worked. Did that ever work? No. Did that ever work? I know we like to think, well, when my parents told me that, I have these conversations with my mother sometimes, and she reminds me that I was like this my whole life as well. And, oh no, Mom, you're just being forgetful. No, that wasn't me. That was my brother that did that. I was the good kid, not the perfect child. That was a different sibling. And so Paul is trying to reel the church back in. He's trying to remind them, this is what I told you. This is what I've done for you. This is what I've gone through. And you should recognize this. And even today, when we get to the middle of the passage, we'll see Paul is like, listen, this is what I've done for you. This is what you should do for me. Okay, this is how you should live it out in accordance. And so in our last section, we talked about Paul's message of reconciliation. This was 4 weeks ago, last time I was here. The last passage we talked to, 5:18 through 6:2, being reconciled to God entails aligning oneself with Paul and his message. So Paul is like, listen, I raised you and letting you know that I was an apostle. I had the message of God. This is important. You need to follow it. And now you've got people in the church that are going off. And he says, this is what you need to get back on track with me. Okay? In other words, don't accept God's great gift, that is salvation, and then ignore it. That was at the end of chapter 5 where he said, we urge you not to receive God's grace in vain, for he says, in the time of my favor I heard you, and in the day of salvation I helped you. And when should we do this? Verse 2, I tell you, now is the time of God's favor. Now is the day of salvation. You need to do this now. Have you ever successfully, I just want to know if it's possible, have you ever successfully gotten an adult child to do something quickly? Yeah, it's, they'll get to it. Eventually. You grow up, or the kids grow up, and you kind of you amuse yourself that there's this instant obedience thing happening. When you were younger, 3, you used to do what I told you. Now you're 23, and kind of. But be that as it may, so Paul is saying now, don't wait on this. This is something to do now. Okay, and then getting into where we are today, starting in verse 3. Paul is going to list off some of his hardships. He said, we put no stumbling block in anyone's path so that our ministry will not be discredited. Okay, so Paul is talking to the church and he's saying, the problem is not with me. Okay, there's nothing in my ministry that you can really take advantage of to go off the path like you are. Okay, Paul lives in such a way that no one stumbles. Okay, and he talks about the gospel is a stumbling block. In other one of his texts, in other letters, Paul talks about the gospel as being a stumbling block. But he says, not your life. Your life shouldn't be a stumbling block. Okay, so it doesn't discredit the ministry. Okay, that's unfortunately we have people that just major, it seems, in discrediting the ministry. Every week, Debbie and I are talking about this is the trouble with social media. Okay, if you follow the right people on social media, or maybe it's the wrong people on social media, I guess it could be, you're always hearing about, this pastor did this or this preacher did that, and we have this conversation about this guy did this and this guy did that, no, it's terrible, kind of stuff, discrediting the ministry. People going, hey, look what this guy did, look what this guy said, kind of stuff. Paul lives in such a way. So now he's going to list. He says, listen, I've gone through a lot for you. I've gone through a lot for my ministry. And he's going to list several of them coming up here. Again, and this is not the first time he's made this kind of statement, even in Corinthians, even in 2 Corinthians. He says, rather, as servants of God, we commend ourselves in every way in great endurance. Now, one of the questions about this particular text is, Paul is going to give a list, and you can see this big block there. And because endurance leads it off, some have suggested, and I think it makes sense, that when Paul is talking about endurance, he says this is the overarching characteristic, that you just have to keep going, to keep on keeping on, despite knowing what's coming or suspecting what's going to come. So Paul suffers in many ways in great endurance, the overarching characteristic. And what has he dealt with? Well, first of all, he's going to start talking about his hardships. So Paul gives a great list of hardships. This isn't actually, I'm looking at it now, really, this isn't formatted the best way. But Paul, the first thing is going to be hardships. In troubles, where am I here? In troubles, hardships and distresses, in beatings, imprisonment, riots, hard work, sleepless nights, and hunger. These are all different things that Paul has experienced in his ministry. Maybe not exactly in Corinth itself, although if you remember, it wasn't all that great in Corinth. Remember, they took him to court. The people in Corinth took him to court there. Okay, troubles, hardship, distresses, beatings. Okay, and in another one of his epistles, he'll talk about how many times he was beaten, 39 times. Imprisonment in Acts chapter 16. Of that, of course, then he was arrested and taken to Rome. That was all one big long imprisonment. Riots. Remember there at the couple of times they wanted to kill him. Hard work, sleepless nights, and hunger. And these are different because this is in verses 4b, end of 4 and 5, and they're in plus a plural. Okay, so in troubles, in hardships, in distresses, in beatings, in imprisonments. So these are things that have happened multiple times to him. But it's not all bad because he gives a list of graces. In purity, in understanding, patience, kindness. Again, this is just straight out of the impurity, understanding, patience, and kindness. In the Holy Spirit and in sincere love. Truthful speech, which is a really good kind of speech to be practicing. In truthful speech. And the power of God. With weapons of righteousness. Now, Paul is later going to go into in Ephesians where he talks about the armor of God. But maybe at this point, I don't know where the writing of Ephesians falls compared to 2 Corinthians. It might have been before. So he may already have developed that whole put on the whole armor of God idea. But certainly it's around this time where he's dealing with that idea. And with weapons of righteousness in both hands. Okay, in the text it says weapons of righteousness in the right hand and in the left. Okay, and here this is 5b through 7a, and these listing of graces are in plus a singular. Okay, listing of graces: purity, understanding, patience, kindness, love, truthful speech. Okay, with weapons of righteousness, and truthful speech. It's interesting because I'm going to be I'm going to be doing I believe they haven't said no yet. I'm actually going to be doing a presentation at the high school where I sub. It's kind of like they threw out this question, did anybody want to do a presentation? I said, yeah, I'll do a presentation about what it's like to be a sub in your school. And they said, okay. Now, I don't think they quite realize yet that other teachers. We'll see. I don't know. Maybe nobody. Maybe they all may realize he's just a sub. We don't really care. So now I've suddenly started to think about, okay, now if I'm talking to these professional educators and there's, they say, how many can be in the room? And I said, well, I don't, because they were asking the Google form, they were asking questions. What is there a limit to the number of people that you're comfortable talking to? And I literally put that, I don't care, 5 to 500, it doesn't matter to me. I'm just, so now I started thinking about some of the issues that you have to deal with as a substitute, and to professional educators, this is kind of, sometimes it's hard to put it this way, but the kids lie.
Really?
I mean, it's just, did anybody ever watch House, the TV show House, the Dr. House? What did he say all the time about people lying? Everybody lies. If a student is trying to explain something to me, my default is you're lying to me because you want me to do something that you normally wouldn't be able to do, but you think you can convince me. I had a kid in the last class I was in. These two girls, we leave 5 minutes early. Why? Well, we have a pass. Do you have the pass? Well, no, it's in my other. Well, I really need to see the pass. Well, Mr. So-and-so lets us leave 5 minutes early. And we're just going to leave 5 minutes early. So I'm like, I'm a sub. I can't, I could go to a great deal of effort to try and verify this. I'm like, what's the point? I figure. Then, of course, they get up 7. They literally, the whole hour, the two girls are sitting in the back of the room, like practicing TikTok dances. I'm not making this up, right? I would demonstrate it, but it's being filmed, and then I don't, this would come back to haunt me. They're practicing TikTok dances, but of course they have to get up so they can get to their next class and do their next session. This is what they said. I mean, I went so far as to look at where their next class was, because I can figure that out. And it's like about as far as this room is to the gymnasium. So there's a 5-minute passing period, and you needed 5 extra minutes to get from here to the gymnasium. So am I being lied to? Absolutely. I go to, but of course, oh no, they're not lying to. Okay. Granted, I'm a different generation than most of those teachers that I'm dealing with. Okay, it's different. I mean, you realize that we've got people that are 24 years old now and below were not born in the 20th century. It's like, whoa, wait a minute. Which is how part of the explanation, if anybody asks, how is it I can have worked for Ford for 31 years, been married for 32 years, and I'm still only 35? It's like, well, I was born in the 20th century. Time worked different then. They go, oh, you were born in the 20s. Silas, my 25-year-old son, so, he just tells people he was born in the 1900s. 1998, but it is the 1900s, kind of thing. So it does sound older. But again, trying to think of, I'm not getting truthful speech. Okay, I'm not necessarily getting truthful speech from everyone. Okay, or he wants truthful speech in the power of God, and then he gives a list of changing circumstances. Okay, a list of changing circumstances, beginning with verse 6. Through glory and dishonor, bad report and good report. Where am I? Changing circumstances through glory and dishonor, through bad and good report. Genuine, yet seen as imposters. Known, yet regarded as unknown. Dying yet alive. This might be my record fill in the blank line here. Beaten but not killed. Sorrowful yet rejoicing. Poor yet making many rich. Having nothing yet possessing everything. I mean, I think there's could be a really interesting whole series of there could be a whole series of messages on that, just going through each of these and kind of developing, especially the latter, the changing circumstances. I mean, how much exegesis do you need to talk about beating? But be that as it may, poor yet making many rich, having nothing yet possessing everything. These are all the things, Paul's like, these are all the things I've gone through for you in my ministry, and you're a part of that. This was all done for you. If any of you ever don't confess. This is not a confession time. Have you had that conversation with one of your kids? I did it all for you. You see it in the movies all the time. Usually it's, why did you rob a bank? I did it for you. I did not rob a bank for my kids. No. Maybe for Debbie I might have done it once or twice, but not for the kids. And then in verse 11, we have spoken freely to you, Corinthians, and opened wide our hearts to you. This is Paul, I've done this, I did all of this for you. Okay? Paul reminds the Corinthians of his transparency. Okay? And basically his conclusion to this point, beginning with verse 12, we are not withholding our affection from you, but you are withholding yours from us. And again, Paul is using that we, us construction there. As a fair exchange, I speak as to my children. Open wide your hearts also. He's like, just return the favor. Okay? Paul ends with a command, open wide your heart to me also. I have done all of this for you. I have been perfectly transparent with you. I have given everything I have for you. I'm not getting the response I need. Okay? Open wide your heart to me also. I speak this to my children, open wide your hearts also. Now, side note, as we move in, chapter 4, verse 14 through 7:1 is one of the passages that people say is a separate letter. There's an argument. Again, I told you that there are some who say that 2 Corinthians is actually a combination or a compilation of several different letters from Paul. That somebody went through and said, okay, he said this, let's all try and put it in some thematic way. Simply because it's kind of different. I'm just throwing it out there. Some people said that there isn't a separate text of it. It's just people looking at it from internal evidence and say, oh, this is clearly different. So it's not. Whereas Paul, it could have been a situation where Paul, an alternative way to discuss it is, I don't think Paul sat down one day, said, you know what, I'm going to write another letter to the Corinthians. And sat down and wrote, starting with verse 1, chapter 1, and didn't get up again until he was through chapter 13. I think 13 is how many chapters there are. I don't think that's how he did it. I think he started it, and have any of you done this? You start writing something, writing a letter, and then you go away. Anybody still write letters? Now it's emails, one sentence. Pursuant to your request, attached is this, But back in the day, when you wrote letters, you start it, and then you go away, and then you come back. And when you come back, things have happened, something's changed, you found out something, and you just kind of take it in a different direction. This is one of the reasons why I tell the kids who are writing these essays. It's like, you got to, however you write it, you have to come back and look at it again after the fact. Wait a day, come back and look. Now, this is assuming you didn't turn it in 3 days late to begin with. So you come back a day later. You ever do that? You write something, you write an essay, whatever. I know, high school. Okay. You write something, and then you let it sit. You come back a couple of days later, and you look at it, and you go, "Oh, what was I thinking?" Now, what's really fun is when it's the 21st century, and you went to school in the 1900s. I was going to say in the 19th century. I'm not that old. You went to school in the 1900s, and then as a fluke, you happen to be going through something, and you discover a paper you wrote as a college junior, okay, some decades ago, and you start reading it. And you think, oh my word, what was I thinking? Okay. And then you look at the grade and you're like, what were they thinking? Sort of thing. I cannot believe I passed that class with that dribble. But be that as it may, the only worse thing than that is giving your high school or your early college paper to your wife with the graduate degree in English. And then she's, oh, that's not a good, don't do that. Don't. There's a reason that hasn't happened. Yeah, I am. So, but be that as it may. So I think Paul is looking at this, and he comes in and he says, okay, how are you not being transparent? How are you not opening your heart wide to me? And I think one of the problems that's going on in the Corinthian church is that they've got this opposition group. Maybe it's an individual, maybe it's a couple of people. And ironically, it doesn't take a lot of people, and this is not a suggestion, but it doesn't take a lot of people to form a real problem group in the church, even a large church, okay? If you've got a church where the regular attendance is 7 and one person is upset, you think, oh, well, that's 14% of your population. But even if you have a church of 100 and there's 2 or 3 that are upset and getting together and talking, that can still be a real problematic, okay? And so, here he's like, and I think part of Paul's issue with the church at Corinth is like, I've given this all for you. I've but there are still, this is my 4th letter, I've done my 3 visits, I've sent Titus there, I've sent Timothy there, and you still are hanging around this guy. Let's just assume it's an individual. Most people think it's an individual, but it could be. You're still hanging around this guy who won't get on board. Okay, so you can understand Paul's issue. It's kind of like suppose there's somebody that you really, you have a friend over here who's a very good friend of yours, and then you have somebody over here who really done you wrong, which is like one of the greatest lines in all music, or in Western. Hey, done me wrong. Okay, this person did you wrong for whatever reason, and you find out that your good friend and the done you wrong person are hanging out together. And of course we think, oh, isn't that great? Right? No, we go, why are you, this person, I told you, why are you, kind of thing. And so I think Paul is thinking, like, why are you still hanging around with this guy? Why are you still letting this guy influence you? And then he comes in 6:14, do not be yoked together with unbelievers. Okay, so Paul is this is not just Paul dropping a passage in, oh, by the way, let me talk about separation. Paul is in the very context, he's like, why are you still hanging around with this guy who clearly isn't on board? Why are you still letting him be an influence in your church? Come out from among them. Do not be yoked together with unbelievers. For what do righteousness and wickedness have in common? Or what fellowship can light have with darkness? What harmony is there between Christ and Belial? Or what does a believer have in common with an unbeliever? Okay? What agreement is there between the temple of God and idols? Now this is probably one of the 2 or 3 best known passages in 2 Corinthians. And it usually comes out dealing with why you shouldn't get married to an unbeliever. Right? And that makes perfect sense. It applies. That principle makes perfect sense. I know, and everybody thinks, well, I know so-and-so, I've heard that, yeah, you can marry somebody of a different faith, different religion, non-believer, and it'll be great until the kids come along. Then it gets exciting. Then it gets fun. Like, if it wasn't fun already. Then it's like, okay, well, am I going to raise, so what you think, oh, well, she's going to raise her kids as a this, and I'm going to raise the kids as a that, and when they grow up, they're going to be neither, kind of thing. So you've both failed in whatever kind of thing. But be that as it may, that's where we usually hear it. But I think Paul is looking at in the church. You have people that you are fellowshipping with who are clearly anti what's going on. Okay. So Paul ends with this command. Let me go back to my thing. Paul reminds the Corinthians of his transparency. Paul ends with a command, open wide your heart to me also, verse 13. And then he gives another command, do not be yoked together with unbelievers. Now, who are these people? Okay. Who are these people? Well, we just read through the passage. They are the wicked as opposed to the righteous. Okay. The wicked as opposed to the righteous. Those in darkness as opposed to those in the list. I'm sorry, in the light. I can't read my own writing. Followers of Belial as opposed to followers of Christ. Now, interesting, this is I think the NIV says Beliar. Beliar. This is the only time in the New Testament that its name is given for Satan. Okay? But it is a name in that era. There are other texts, not biblical, non-biblical, first century texts, where this name is used to indicate, oh, that is a satanic being, that is a demonic being, kind of thing. But this is the only time it's used in the New Testament. Okay. But followers of Belial as opposed to followers of Christ. Those who don't believe as opposed to those who do. And those who serve idols as opposed to those who are in, and in parentheses I put are, the temple. And again, this last point to, again, remember 1 Corinthians. What is one of their things? Their thing, meat offered to idols, and people going to these meals in the temple, in the pagan temple, having their the meal there, and that was a problem. So that you still have this relationship between the idol or the pagan temple there in Corinth. Okay, so and Paul's point here, and I think that Paul's point here is separation from the world, not necessarily other believers. And I say that because growing up, I grew up in the independent fundamental Baptist universe, and this church, for a long period of time, probably the first 150 years of its existence, would have been considered an independent fundamental Baptist church. Okay, it's still not that far from. Some might look at it and go, yeah, you're still an independent fundamental Baptist church. But one of the things about being in the independent fundamental Baptist movement, one of the big doctrines that you talked about all the time was separation. And you had separation, and they would come back to this passage. Do not be yoked together with unbelievers. Okay, and so then you led from that into what's called secondary separation. So secondary separation is why you don't, as an independent fundamental, an IFB, why you don't hang with Billy Graham. Billy Graham, bad. No. You don't do Billy Graham. Why not? If you listen to a Billy Graham sermon, right, and if you listen to a Billy Graham sermon, you wouldn't tell the difference. It would sound just exactly like somebody else in an independent fundamental Baptist church could read a Billy Graham sermon and nobody would know. Okay? Especially, like when he died, I went online and was kind of, going back in the 50s and 60s, there were a lot more of his sermons that were videotaped and recorded, and so you could kind of go back and watch them. But Billy Graham would partner with Methodists, Lutherans, Catholics. Okay, we can't, yeah. So we can't be doing that. We can't be getting together with them. So we can't be with Billy Graham. So, up until the time I was, 20 years old, 20, 21, 22 years old, Billy Graham was like, no, you don't mess with Billy Graham, man. Don't touch, don't go near him. And you would make a big deal out of it. It was, this is what's wrong with Billy Graham, kind of thing. Okay, people who were important to me, from I don't know, perhaps like named after college went to named after them, would write things, articles about why you can't follow, why we don't support Billy Graham, kind of thing. But it was, and they would come back to this passage. And Paul is like, no, this is just come out from the world. Okay, there's some distinction. There needs to be some distinction about what it means to be a believer. Okay, if they can't tell a difference between you and anyone else, then there's no reason for them to investigate what it is about you, because there's nothing to investigate. What's so different about you? What makes you different? So Paul's point is separation from the world. It says, for we are the temple of the living God, as God has said, I will live with them and walk among them. I will be their God, and they will be my people. So who are the temple of God? The body, the church. It's interesting. He's quoting from Leviticus chapter 26 there, and I wanted to look at this passage. I know I don't know if they're still in it, but I think the youth group was studying Leviticus not too long ago. Anybody got kids in the youth group?
Yes, they are.
Are they?
Yeah.
They were doing Leviticus, which I thought was bold. It's like, in Leviticus 26, this is Moses is giving the law, writing down the law to the. And again, Moses didn't sit down and write Genesis 1 through Genesis 50. All right, done with that. Let's sit down and write Exodus. Okay, let's sit down and write Leviticus. I think Moses, just as a leader, was a writer, and he wrote things, and somebody later put them together. Okay, these are Levitical kind of laws. They should go here. This is about that time we left Egypt. That should go here. This is, kind of stuff. But he's talking about the promise that God had made. So God is speaking. If you follow, verse 3, Leviticus 26, verse 3, if you follow my decrees and are careful to obey my commands, I will send you rain in its season, and the ground will yield its crops, and the trees in their fruit. Your threshing will continue until grape harvest, and the grape harvest will continue until planting, and you will eat all the food you want and live in safety in your land. I will grant peace in your land, and you will lie down, and no one will make you afraid. I will remove wild beasts from the land, and the sword will not pass through your country. You will pursue your enemies, and they will fall by the sword before you. 5 of you will chase 100, and 100 of you will chase 10,000, and your enemies will fall by the sword before you. Okay, so does this, anybody heard this passage before? I've heard it. I will look on you with favor and make you fruitful and increase your numbers, and I will keep my covenant with you. You will still be eating last year's harvest when you have to move it out to make room for the new. I will put my dwelling in place among you, and I will not abhor you. I will walk among you and be your God, and you will be my people. I am the Lord your God who brought you up out of Egypt so that you would no longer be slaves. I broke the bars of your yoke and enabled you to walk with heads held high. Okay, so Paul is like, this is God's promise, that God is going to walk among you. But, verse 14, if you will not listen to me, and if you reject my decrees and abhor my laws and fail to carry out my commands, then I will do this. And he goes on, I will bring on you sudden terror, wasting diseases and fever, etc., etc., etc. So God is, this is a promise that God has. And it's like, if things aren't working out, now is that, Debbie and I were talking about the stories in Samuel coming up here today with David and Saul and all of those guys and some of the troubles that they went through and issues that they were facing. And, it isn't sounding like this first part. And part of it is, or not, I shouldn't say part of it, all of it is, if you follow my decrees, then, that wasn't being followed. So given that this is the promise, by following his decrees, what do? Well, come out. And come out from among them and be ye separate. That's from Isaiah 52:11. Okay? Therefore come out from them and be separate, says the Lord. Touch no unclean thing, and I will receive you. And I will be a father to you, and you will be my sons and daughters, says the Lord Almighty. We're going to finish in chapter 7, verse 1. Therefore, since we have these promises, dear friends, let us purify ourselves from everything that contaminates body and spirit, perfecting holiness out of reverence for God. So Paul concludes his point here. He says if Paul missed anything, okay, as far as what you shouldn't be doing, he reminds the readers in 7 verse 1 that they should purify themselves from everything that contaminates body and spirit. Okay, so again, Paul has given all of these, come out from among them. He refers back to these Old Testament promises, that this is what God has promised to those who follow him. And Paul, as an observant Jew, again, I think Paul, to the day he died, considered himself a Jew, a follower of the Old Testament law. Okay, he says these are the promises that we can hang on to. These are the things, and if it's not happening, it's because you're not following the law. And Paul has just given all of these examples to the church at Corinth. I did all of this stuff for you. Again, it's the parent trying to steer the kid back. Is it going to happen? Is it going to work? We'll find out next week. Questions? Yes.
So, this is about an unbeliever who is being tolerated within the body as opposed to a believer who's got an issue and is fomenting this rest and
Yes. Yes.
in the body.
Yes. There are other passages that deal with that.
Right.
But here Paul is talking about, I believe, and my sources, Paul is talking about just this toleration of unbelievers in the church itself. Well, thank you very much for coming. See you all next week. I will be here again next week.